Automation. You need automation if you want your mixes to be well balanced and to keep your listeners' attention by evolving over time. But it can easily eat up way too much of your time, and it's honestly just annoying to do. Drew here with Musician Automation, and today I'm going to show you one of my favorite tricks for saving time in a mix while still getting pro results. Automation macros. So what are automation macros? Basically, these are single knobs inside of your DAW that you can use to change a bunch of different effects at the same time. So let's say I wanted to take this drum bus and turn the volume down and pan it to the left at the same time. I can do these at the same time just by moving one knob. So yeah, with the macro, I could assign multiple parameters to one knob and just turn them all up or down simultaneously. It can be such a pain to automate tons of different things one by one, especially when you're basically doing the same thing to them, and it's not really CPU efficient. So how do you do it? The way it works in Logic is you need to open up the Smart Controls, and you can do that by either selecting this button or just pressing B on your keyboard. And usually, I've been playing around with this a little bit earlier, so we've already got this here, but usually this is just gonna be a blank window. So you're going to have to add a plugin on here. For some reason, channel EQs don't actually bring it up. So for example, I might add a gain on here. And like I said, I've been messing around with this before, so we've already got this squared away. But normally it would auto map some parameters from the gain here. So I'd have to go into settings here and press delete all patch mappings. And that would get you the screen I've got right here where all of these knobs are unmapped. And that means that we can assign them to whatever we want. So for example, I could go in here and we've got our unmapped parameter here, and let's go ahead and assign it to the gain. There's a couple different ways I could do this. I could literally click on it right here, go find the gain, or let me get rid of that just so I can show you how this works. I could click on the knob I want to map it to and then just press learn. And the next thing I click, it's going to set that as the mapping. So when I click on gain, there we go. It sets the gain as the map. So we want to assign both the gain and the balance, aka the pan, to this. So we're gonna need to add another mapping. So we just go into settings, add mapping again, and now we've got two. We've got the gain, and when I click on balance, we've got the panning as well. And you'll see as I move this knob, both the gain and balance will move as well. So right away, we can just change both of these at the same time. But let's say we want to do it a little bit differently. Maybe we want to turn up the gain while the pan goes to the left. Well, I'll just click on gain and I'll press invert, and that literally inverts what it's doing. So as I turn this knob up, it turns the gain down. As I turn the knob up, the gain goes up as well. So yeah, super easy to use. That's really all it takes. You can set your range here. So, you know, when I'm looking at the gain, if I don't want it to go all the way down to 96 dB, which is really negative 96 dB, that's really, really low. Maybe I only want it to go down to negative 12, and I only want it to go up to positive 12. I'll just write that into the range here, the range minimum and maximum. And now it's going to adhere to that as I move this knob. And I could do the same thing with the balance, of course. I could set it so it's just 50% and 50%. And lastly, the other thing that you can control with the macros is the scaling. And basically that means how steep the effect is. So maybe I want the pan to be a little bit slower than the gain. I can open up the scaling curve and just move it around. So, you know, if I want it to be a little bit faster, I could tell it to move up quicker, or if I want it to be slower, I could elongate that curve and it'll change. And of course, we've got different curve types here. If I wanted an S curve, I could use that. And once again, what I'm affecting with these curves is how quickly the parameter changes. So as it's moved up, it's going to change way more drastically. As it's moved down, it's going to change a lot slower, as you can see right there. A lot you can work with here, but how would you use this in a mixed setting? What kind of benefit can this give you? Well, let's talk about the two uses. You can use macros in two different ways. You can make broad changes to your entire mix all at once with a bus macro, or you could make complex effects for one single sound with a channel macro. What does that mean? Bus or channel macro? Just like the name suggests, a bus macro is going to affect a bunch of different tracks, while the single channel macro is just affecting one channel. Let's talk about bus macros first because they're the most dramatic example. The changes you want to make with a bus macro are probably going to be a lot subtler because you're affecting a lot more instruments, so you don't necessarily want to just like totally go really wild with it. You could use a bus macro to do all sorts of things, really. For example, let's say I had a compressor on this drum bus. So let's grab a compressor real quick. And I've got it set, let's say I've got the compressor set just so that it's only catching the peaks of the sound. Let's see how that would sound.
I can still smell your smoke all over my sheet.
So yeah, we're only catching the peaks right there. But maybe I only want the compressor to catch the peaks for most of the sound, but later on in the song, there's one section where I want it to be a little more obvious, a little pumpier. I could put a second compressor on there and just bypass them, or I could do this with a macro. And that way I can save on CPU. I've only got one plugin on there, and I only really have to switch one knob. Let me show you how I do this. First off, of course, we're going to have to map our parameters. So I'll select the knob that I want to map them to. I'll add a few more mappings to it. So I've mapped the threshold, attack, and release all to this macro. But of course, I want the threshold to turn down while I want the attack and the release to turn up. So I'm gonna have to invert it. I'll just click invert right there, and there we go. It's working exactly how I want it to. And now I'm gonna go ahead and write this in. So I'm gonna write this knob so that when I first start playing the song, we're just gonna be catching the peaks with the drum compressor. But as I turn it up, we're gonna get a lot more pumpy, obvious sound. And of course, to do this, I need to let the drum bus know that I want to write automation. And it's super easy to do that. All you have to do is click on the channel, and with the information tab open so that you can see the channel over here, you're just gonna click this drop down and switch it from read to touch. And basically what we're telling Logic is that instead of this channel reading automation data, we want to write automation data. And specifically, the way we want to write automation data is by touching different effects and changing them while we play the song. This will only work if we're playing the song. So let's go ahead and do that now. I'm gonna play the song, and I'm gonna turn this macro up, and we'll change the whole tone of the compressor in doing so.
I can still smell your smoke all over my sheet. I can still feel your touch on my skin like a burn in the third degree.
There we go. So as you can see, I'll open up the automation lane right here, and we've written it in there. It says compressor threshold, but it is changing the attack and the release as well. Let me show you.
I can still smell your smoke all over my sheet.
See, they're all going up there.
I can still feel you.
So yeah, in a matter of seconds, I was able to totally change the sound of our drum compressor, and all it took was me just telling Logic that I wanted to write automation and that I wanted to use this macro to do it. Now, there are a couple things you do need to be careful about when you're doing this. For example, if I keep learn on, like I've done just now, if I accidentally touch the volume fader for any reason, it would automatically rewrite that as what I was mapping it to. So you gotta be careful about that. You don't wanna have that happen to you. And you may need to do a little bit of finagling with the range minimum and maximum if you're using like a distortion or something like that. But Aside from that, this is a really easy effect to use, and once you've written in your automation, be sure to set the channel back to read. If you leave it on touch, you're gonna mess up your whole tone because anytime you change anything while the song's playing, it's gonna write it as automation. So be really careful that you don't leave this on touch when you don't want it to be. So let's check out another case where I might use a bus macro, and I'm actually going to use our stereo output for this. If you're wondering how I got the stereo output to be in the arrangement view here like this, I just set it to touch. So I went into the mix view, changed it from read to touch, and now it's down here. And what I'm gonna do with it is band pass the entire mix for a few seconds. And this is a great way to get a cool radio kind of sound, like the song is coming through a distant radio. So I'll press B on my keyboard to open up the smart controls again. And I'm gonna use 2 this time. So I'm gonna add an EQ onto the track, and then I'm gonna start mapping. So with this first macro, we're gonna turn on both the low cut and the high cut filter. So I'll hit learn, and I've assigned that one. I'll add another mapping, select it, hit learn on that, and there we go. So when I start playing the song, right now both filters are off, and now they're on. Super simple. That took all of a couple seconds to automate both of those to turn on. Next up, now we're going to map the frequencies that these filters are set to so that they'll constrict in on the track. So I'll create a second mapping here and select one, set it to the low cut frequency, and I'll select the other and set it to the high cut frequency. Now, we want one of these to go down and the other one to go up. So naturally, I'm gonna have to invert one of them. There we go. And weirdly enough, that's not working. So let me double check something. There we go. Okay, now we got both of them going. Just mixed around my order of operations a little bit. And now we can write in this automation data so that both of these will band pass the song simultaneously.
I can still smell your smoke all over my sheet. I can still feel your touch on my skin like a burn in the 3rd degree. You were meant.
Now, you may have noticed right there that it opened up really quickly, and what happened is I let go of the macro knob. This is one thing that you need to be careful of when you're using these is as soon as you let go of this knob, it's going to normalize back to its original starting position. So don't let go of it until you're done with your automation. Otherwise, you might have to redo it. So that sounded pretty cool to me. I'm gonna make sure to set this to read instead of touch so that I don't get any unwanted issues. And as you can see, we've got both of our macro data written in here. But what if I wanna change the sound a little bit? You know, it sounds cool to me, but maybe I want it to be just a little bit different. Well, I can change the scaling. You know, maybe I want the low cut frequency to change faster than the high cut one. I'll open up the scaling and I'll change the curve for it. So I'll grab one of these curves and make it a little bit more oblong like that so that it comes in quicker. Let's check out how that sounds.
I can still smell your smoke all over my sheet.
Yeah, and honestly, it's a little bit too much of an effect. I wouldn't want to use that exactly in a song, but you get the idea. This is a really powerful way to really quickly create cool effects. There's a ton of cool ways you could use this. You could band pass just the drums for a little bit, or if you're sending some background vocals to a few different buses, you could increase or decrease the amount of volume you're sending to those buses all at once. Really, anytime you think you may need to automate multiple things at the same time on one bus, you could probably save yourself some headache by doing it with a macro. Now, let's look at channel macros. Let's say you have a sound that you just want to make off the rails, wild with effects. Maybe you want to turn up a distortion, a reverb, and a delay all at once. You're just getting wild with it. You can do that with a macro. So for example, I've got this vocal right here, and I've got phasis, which is like a phaser chorus effect. And then I've also got a couple different sends. One of them has a reverb on it, and the other one has a tape delay. And right now I'm not sending anything to either of those sends, but I can use a macro on this single channel to turn all of these up at once. So here's how the vocal sounds without anything on it.
I can still smell your smoke all over my sheets.
And we're gonna make a macro. So here we've got it set up here. I'm gonna add another mapping, add 2 more mappings. There we go. And let's open up phasis. So the first thing that I'm gonna map it to is the mix of phasis. I've already got it timed with my track. It sounds good to me, but I just need to turn the mix up when I want the effect to come in. Select our next mapping, and I'm gonna set it to the send. So that's our send 1 right there. And now I'm mapping the second one to send 2. And I'm gonna turn learn off now that I've got everything I want. So let's go ahead and set our track to touch so that we can write this automation. And I'm gonna turn it up after that first line.
I can still smell your smoke all over my sheets. I can still feel your touch on my skin like a burn in the 3rd degree. You were meant to be adored by more than just me. I can tell by the blaze.
Really weird, right? But you might want to use a weird effect like that at some point in the song. And of course, you don't have to use what I've got here. You could use anything on here. You know, you could turn up the compression, get some totally different EQ settings. Whatever you want to do for your effect, you could do it really easily, really quickly with an automation macro. Of course, you could use a bus macro to make a super weird effect, or you could use just tonal changes with a channel macro. Those are great ways to use macros as well, but generally speaking, I find myself doing more tonal automation on buses and more effects automation on individual channels. So for me, it makes the most sense to use bus macros to change tone and channel macros to get really weird effects. And aside from speeding things up, part of the beauty of using these is that it makes you less likely to just agonize over getting an effect perfect, just right. If you're automating every parameter individually, you can easily just get into a mindset where you're fine-tuning each thing way too much. You're spending 30 minutes on something that should really only take 5. And obviously it's tempting to try and get something that sounds just right, but a lot of the time your listeners won't really notice the difference between an effect you spent 8 minutes making and one you sank an hour into. Plus, a lot of the most iconic sounds out there stem from musicians just using the tools they had on hand. So this is about saving you time, but it's also about making sure you're not becoming way too much of a perfectionist and wasting time that you don't need to perfecting sounds. You're placing limitations around your mixing so that you can get things done more effectively. And you may just end up with an effect that sounds better than if you'd perfected it. Obviously, not every mix is going to call for this. You're not going to need to be using automation macros every single time you sit down with a song. But if you think you're going to be doing a lot of automation, or you find yourself doing a lot of really repetitive tasks with your automation, try to work macros into your workflow. Like I said, it can be a little bit finicky at first with Logic. You gotta set the ranges, you may want to mess with scaling and inverting and stuff. And of course, you have to be careful with your gain staging and making sure that things aren't getting way louder than they were before. But nonetheless, if you spend some time practicing with it and getting used to how macros work, pretty quickly you'll get to a stage where it only takes you a few seconds to set them up and get all of your automation on a track done like that. But automation is just one small part of making awesome music from home. Even if you're great with automation macros, you can still end up with mixes that feel lackluster. So if you really want to make sure you're getting the most out of every mix, check out this free workshop Rob Mazes, the founder of Musician Automation, made. He goes over the 7 steps to getting radio-ready mixes, and he shows you his approach to home recording and mixing, which will help you do all of this way faster. 36,000 people have already done this workshop, and it really only took them a few days to start seeing results. So check it out if you don't want to waste your time and money on the wrong things, and you want to learn the 7 steps you really need to make pro mixes. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a like. If you really like this video and you're new here, don't forget to subscribe. All right, that's all for me. I'm Drew Swisher with Musician on a Mission. I'll see you again soon, and remember, create regardless.